The opinions expressed in the following message are those of the Shell Petroleum Company, and in no way misrepresent the business interests of the corporate-owned media in which it originally appeared.
People have the right to the truth, unvarnished, even uncomfortable, but never subjugated to a cause, however noble or well-meaning. They have the right to clear thinking. Slogans, boycotts, and protests don't offer answers. It has been suggested that Shell should pull out of developing nations altogether. The oil would certainly continue flowing, the business would continue operating, the vast majority of the employees would remain in place, but the sound and ethical business practices synonymous with Shell, the environmental investment, and the tens of millions of dollars spent on community programs would all be lost. Again, it's the people of developing nations that you would hurt. It's easy enough to sit in your comfortable homes in the West, calling for sanctions and boycotts against a developing country. But you have to be sure that knee-jerk reactions won't do more harm than good. Some campaigning groups say that we should intervene in the political process in developing nations. But even if we could, we must never do so. Politics is the business of governments and politicians. The world where companies use their economic influence to prop up or bring down governments would be a frightening and bleak one indeed.
People have the right to the truth, unvarnished, even uncomfortable, but never subjugated to a cause, however noble or well-meaning. They have the right to clear thinking. Slogans, protests, and...
You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, we are discussing a public disservice announcement from Shell, track 6 from 1996's Less Talk, More Rock. We are going to start this episode off with a cover and then the interview portion of the show because the guest is very special. Matt Milkowski is back with a cover. Matt wrote the lyrics and appeared on our contest song episode. He did a great cover of Who Will Help Me Bake This Bread on the 30th anniversary of How to Clean Everything episode. And he also did a great mutual friend cover from the I'd Rather Be Flag Burning 10-inch. So huge thanks to Matt for coming in for us again with this really off-the-wall contribution. And just straight up, I want to go ahead and say Matt Milkowski is a full-blown awesome dude.
Oh my gosh, the best. One of my favorite people that I've met throughout the creation of this podcast. Matt has actually been at my house here in Buffalo when he was passing through town. He drove all the way from Chicago to Guelph, Ontario for a propaganda show when we get to hang out at the show and go out to dinner. Matt is an absolutely fantastic fellow. He's also a great teacher. He's an art teacher in Chicago. So Matt is like one of my most favorite people that I've met doing this show.
I'm absolutely devastated that I didn't get a proper meet with Matt Milkowski at that Guelph show.
Oh, it's going to happen. Like we'll get everybody together again sometime in the future. We just are waiting on propaganda who are not known for their speed of activity as far as like getting out into the world to create these special gatherings where all of us podcast nerds have been able to congregate the last couple of years. So we'll get there. I think that Matt will be committed to that whenever we make it work too, you know?
I'm in.
All right. So Matt's cover is really cool. As always, he does such interesting work. I mean, his Who Will Help Me Bake This Bread and Mutual Friend covers are just so special to me as far as like the canon and the catalog of this podcast goes. And so Matt sent in a caption for his cover on this episode. And Matt said, quote, "Growing up in the early 90s, it took me a while to realize that my dad's habits were not typical for a South Side Chicagoan who grew up working in the steel mills. Dad parked the car immediately when entering a huge parking lot and walked across the lot to the store because driving further to the store's entrance would pollute a bit more. Dad wouldn't let us buy Lunchables because the packaging had way too much plastic. We hung all our clothes to dry on clotheslines in the scary, unfurnished basement, even though we had a working dryer. This saved water and energy as the dryer was only for emergencies. He never lectured at us unless we asked or made others feel bad about not practicing these habits. It's just what he did. And by proxy, us as well. Dad wouldn't buy from Walmart. He wouldn't buy Nike or Gap. And he sure as shit wouldn't buy gas from Shell. I was maybe 10 or 11 when I asked why we don't buy Shell. And he said it was because they let the Nigerian government harass, torture, burn, and kill civilians who protested against Shell's presence and environmental mishaps. He said they looked the other way at best and directly aided at worst. When I got a car, I mimicked his boycott efforts, but as time went on, it became harder to find any company to give money to. BP had the Deepwater Horizon spill, Exxon Mobil had Valdez, and continuously was a top 5 wealthiest company. In 2022, Exxon Mobil made $56 billion in net profits, or close to $2,000 per second. Now, my defeated ass ends up buying gas from nearly all of these companies, but Shell hurts the most. My cover responds to the ongoing legacy of Shell to deny responsibility for its putrescent wake of environmental and economic catastrophe. Both the Niger Delta fallout and the hyper-recent California lawsuits were taken into account. I'm sure Shell has spent what feels like a lot of money on cleanup, renewable energy, and community infrastructure, but I'd also bet my biscuits that they spent the bare minimum needed to help with PR or prevent more lawsuits. Shell's cleanup efforts in Africa have been insufficient, untimely, and disproportionate to the gargantuan profits they've so excessively enjoyed. Cheers. Woo! Okay, so thank you to Matt for spending time on making the cover, finding clips that really fit what he's trying to accomplish to back up that message of what he's conveying with that fantastically written caption that he sent in. Matt's got a couple of credits. He said that the Chrissy-style disclaimer was performed by Matt Milkowski, and the reading of American Petroleum Institute's response was performed by Ollie Hobson, who has a music project called Color for Colors. Matt sent in the quotes, and one of those is from ABC News, and the audio source for the Niger Delta news clip was from Reuters. Matt reverse altered the public disservice announcement by Propaganda for the background audio. So let's hear Matt's cover of a public disservice announcement from Shell. Enjoy.
Lawyers representing more than 13,000 Nigerians argued at London's High Court on Tuesday that Shell is attempting to shield itself from scrutiny over pollution in Nigeria. Thousands of members of the Bile and Ogali communities are suing Shell and its Nigerian subsidiary SPDC over oil spills. Shell strongly denies any liability and argues that parts of the cases were brought too late. It also says the majority of the spills were caused by illegal third-party interference, such as pipeline sabotage and oil theft. The case, parts of which began back in 2015, has already been to the UK Supreme Court. It ruled in 2021 that there was an arguable case that Shell owed the claimants a duty of care.
The opinions expressed in the following message are those of the Shell Petroleum Company and the American Petroleum Institute. The statement was provided to the corporate-owned media in early September 2023 in response to the California climate change lawsuit. Similar honorable statements by Shell in response to the separate lawsuits from the residents of the Niger Delta can be found in 2011, 2015, and 2021.
The record of the past 2 decades demonstrates that the industry has achieved its goal of providing affordable, reliable American energy to U.S. consumers while substantially reducing emissions and our environmental footprint. This ongoing, coordinated campaign to wage meritless, politicized lawsuits against a foundational American industry and its workers is nothing more than a distraction from important national conversations and an enormous waste of California taxpayer resources. Climate policy is for Congress to debate and decide, not the court system.
Okay, so thank you again to Matt Milkowski for that wonderful cover. I'm really excited by that. I just love those contributions.
Honestly, I feel a little bit freaked out at the moment because as we were doing that whole section of Matt Milkowski's cover, I literally got a text message from Matt Milkowski as we were talking about that, as if he was listening to us do this on the spot.
That is insanely, fortuitous, I suppose. It's like his ears were burning from Chicago while we were talking about him from up here in Buffalo and Hamilton. So, hi, Matt. You're texting Steve as we are recording, and I cannot even believe that.
That's wild. Okay, let's go. The interview we have is awesome for this episode.
Mhm.
So, Greg, let's talk about who that is.
Okay, so for decades, I've been listening to this record, and every time this song comes on, you have Chris's voice, but then a new voice comes in, and it's a Scottish voice narrating over the top of this like clowny musical interlude. And I never took the time to investigate who had that voice. Who is this person who is narrating? And so I did some digging, and his name is Ramsey Kanaan. And Ramsey Kanaan is a Lebanese Scottish publisher and distributor of anarchist literature. And in 1987, he founded a publishing company that virtually everybody who listens to Propaganda has heard of, called AK Press. He later went on to found PM Press, where he remains the publisher to this day. And in the 80s, he was the singer of the Scottish anarcho-punk band Political Asylum. And in the 90s, he roadied for Propaganda, and most notably for listeners of this podcast, narrated a public disservice announcement from Shell. So Ramsey and I got on the old Zoom machine together, and we had a wonderful conversation, and we get into some interesting tour stories and the story behind recording this. We also talk about his work as a publisher. We talk about his upcoming book that he's releasing about the band No Means No, which was really cool. And we also have a little bit of some controversies in this interview. So I am super grateful to Ramsey Kanaan for this wonderful interview. I'm grateful to Ramsey for his involvement, his stories, his lifelong career of bringing, new ideas to people like me into the world to expose me to all kinds of new stuff. So it's wonderful getting to be able to have that opportunity to get to know Ramsey. So without further delay, here is my conversation with Ramsey Kanaan.
Slogans, protests, and boycotts don't offer answers. It has been suggested that Shell should pull out of developing nations altogether. The oil would certainly continue flowing, the business would continue operating.
Ramsey Kanaan, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Really my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
This is a wonderful honor for me, Ramsey. I'm so glad that you're here to chat about your work in the world, your involvement in publishing and the music scene, and your experience of working with propaganda a while back on the narration that opened up our chat here today. But before we get into some of those details, I'm wondering if you can just tell the listeners out there a little bit about who you are and what you do.
My name is Ramsey Kanaan. I'm currently ostensibly the publisher of PM Press. PM Press is a publisher of really good books. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I swear a lot in normal talk.
Yeah, go for it. Let it rip.
Anyway, so we publish really fucking good literature.
Yes.
And I've been involved in publishing, and certainly in my younger days, actively in the punk rock scene, community, call it what you have, since my early teenage years. And I guess it was through that confluence of punk rock and publishing and the dissemination of fine ideas that I came into the propaganda orbit.
Wonderful. Well, I discovered I was learning about some of your stuff that you've done in a couple of interviews that you've done with David Rovich on his show. So if anybody is interested in hearing like lots and lots of amazing details about your life, there's a couple of really great interviews that I was watching of yours where you go in so far in depth into, a lot of your own work through AK Press and PM Press that you just mentioned. I'm curious if you could just tell me a little bit about what's got you excited in your work these days. What are you excited about with PM Press going on right now? Because a lot of people may know you from AK Press, but I was kind of surprised to know that you were involved with PM Press. I kind of didn't make that connection until recently. So what's got you excited in your profession these days?
I don't know. I mean, I think what excites me and what motivates me is the end result of what we're trying to do. What we're trying to doing is a very incoherent statement of what we are attempting to do, which is fundamentally we're still attempting to destroy capital and the state, and it's always heartening, uplifting, and makes you feel good about your work when you feel that you are able to make a kind of modest contribution to those ends. And certainly when I was a kid, and even when I was a young man, I guess, in the days when I was actively interacting with propaganda. I think as I get older, my politics, if you like, and what drives me actually becomes deeper and more intense. The more you learn about the depredations of capitalism in the state, the more I really fucking hate it. And the more I am trying to do my damnedest to bring it all to its knees and hopefully create a better world for everyone. And the fact that I'm now an elderly man pushing 60, the fact that I now have kids, etc., actually just, as I say, deepens my hatred and my desire. So, what am I excited about and what we're currently doing? I mean, all kinds of stuff, but it's the kind of fundamentals of what we're doing. Most people's jobs, including mine, are on the day-to-day, are kind of tedious, they're rote, they involve sitting in front of, or standing in my case, in front of a computer for many hours a day, doing data entry and that kind of stuff. But it's the kind of end result. That's when we bring out another fantastic book, and perhaps more importantly, when we know that book is getting into the hands of people that might actually be able to use it. That's what I guess, excites me about my work.
Yeah. I'm looking at pmpress.org right now, and your categories and genres of literature that you publish in is activism and organizing, anarchism and Marxism. You also have art and comics. You have music and songbooks, history and politics, gender and sexuality. There is a fantastic array of stuff here. And just looking through your new releases section alone is every single topic that you can possibly imagine that so many listeners of this podcast would be deeply intrigued to check out. So I'm just definitely encouraging everybody to go check out pmpress.org because it's awesome. And I saw that you all are doing the upcoming No Means No biography, correct?
This is true. I mean, one of the things that does give me pleasure in my work is, as I say, when we actually do fantastic books, which I personally like. I mean, it's unfair to say, what's your favorite book or what are you excited about, which is how you started off, because in one sense, it's like asking, as a parent, who's your favorite child? Since these are all, all of the books are children of mine in one sense. But I am having a lot of fun and a lot of excitement and a lot of kind of reminding myself of how utterly fantastic and important and revelatory were No Means No. I mean, one of the amusing anecdotes of putting that book together is Jason reminded me that, again, back in my youth, when I was a long time ago now, almost 40 years ago now, I played in a punk rock band, and we actually played a gig when I was living in Scotland with No Means No. I guess this would have been in the late 80s. It must have been.
Was that your band Political Asylum?
It was being a band called Political Asylum. So it must have been the late 80s because we broke up in 89, so we couldn't have played with them after 89. But anyway, apparently we played a gig with them in Edinburgh, and now me being a senile old bastard, I literally have no memory of that. I mean, I saw No Means No perform many, many times. I was a big fan many, many times in the UK and in Europe, and probably even in the US later on. But I say I literally have no memory when we played with them, though I talked with our old drummer and guitarist, and they were like, oh, yeah, they were fantastic. They blew us away. And I genuinely have no memory of that gig whatsoever. There you go.
Amazing.
It's fun getting old.
Well, I'm so excited about that book. I actually ordered the signed hardback pre-order edition that Jason put up on the Kickstarter. So I am all in on this this No Means No biography. So I was like so thrilled to make the connection. Be like, oh my gosh, Ramsey's publishing company is putting that out, and we're interviewing next week. And I just ordered the book. So I was just so excited to be able to tell you about how excited I am about that particular book, Canadian Punk Legends. And we're going to talk about more Canadian punk legends right now. So let's go back in time. Take me to the 90s. Propaganda has, How to Clean Everything Out. They're on Fat Records. Tell me a little bit about how you got connected with the band, and maybe how you and AK Press and then Propaganda kind of, started collaborating.
To be honest, I've got no idea. When I knew I was going to be asked this question, unsurprisingly, for the podcast. And again, perhaps it's just my senility. Perhaps it's because my memory is no longer a reliable witness. But I can't actually remember the particular causal connections, other than I can't remember if I moved to America in 1994. I think it was in the spring of 1994. Though I've been coming back and forth for work. Many years. I first came over to America in 1989, actually touring with that band Political Asylum. It was the first time I ever came to America, and fell in love with the burritos and thought I'm going to move to San Francisco, and which I did in 1994. So I was already doing AK Press, and anyway, I'd had some contact with that kind of Fat Records, and actually, again, in the band I was in, we played actually a couple of gigs in that American tour in 89. NoFX supported us on one of the gigs, and actually NoFX supported us in Europe in 1988.
Oh, cool.
So anyway, at the time, NoFX were garbage. That was in the liberal animation days, etc. We thought they were nice guys. We thought, but musically we thought they were fucking terrible.
Yeah, I hate
those.
I
remember when I moved to America in 94, I think it was probably my then partner gave me a copy of is it The Longest Line?
Mm-hmm.
That 12-inch. Say, look, you really like this, and I was like, nah, I know those guys are cool, but the music's crap. And then she forced me to listen to it, and I thought, fucking hell, this is great. It's fantastic. So I was then so when I moved to the Bay Area, I was whatever. I was part of that orbit, if you like. And I guess that was maybe one of the first releases on Fat. And I guess How to Clean Everything was probably second.
One of the first, yeah.
So I'm guessing I came across that and thought, this is fucking fantastic. And other than the music, it's the kind of music I like. Again, musical taste is purely subjective. And so I happen to like that kind of music. I like melody and harmony. But what I was immediately taken with was the kind of in-your-face politics that they married with those fantastically subversively audacious kind of melodic sounds, shall we say. And so I can't remember how the connection was formally made, or even informally for that matter. But obviously it must have happened because it must have been enough that I ended up, recording with them and then touring with them and then having this relationship. But yeah, what the origin story is, I have no fucking idea.
Amazing. I love that. I love whenever my own memories have started to do the exact same things, where I used to be able to have such an encyclopedic memory of what bands opened for which bands at which venue and which time. And now I've been to so many that it's all just blurring together. And so I understand what you mean. And I presume that that's only going to get worse for me in the next 15, 16 years. So, we'll see how it goes. Let's chat about the record. So we've got I got Let's Talk More Rock here, and it was recorded January 96 at Razor's Edge in San Francisco, California, with Ryan Green, doing all the engineering. And I interviewed Ryan Green recently, specifically about the recording of this record. And then as I was talking to Ryan, we just kind of gloss over the public disservice announcement track. And that's when I really got obsessed with tracking you down, because I was like, wait a minute, I have to talk to this person who narrates this if at all possible. And so I'm wondering what you remember about getting involved in the tracking and narration of this song, the spoken word section that is the interlude to the record. So how did that all go down? And then what do you remember about being in the studio and actually doing the performance itself?
So, I say we must have been friends by then for me to have been involved. I say I can't remember how I ended up. I do remember that they were in San Francisco for a while, and that they were kind of writing material in the studio. And I guess in the early years, they had this perennial problem that Fat Mike wouldn't let them release the record unless it was, I guess, 30 minutes or 28 minutes or something. So he was always hassling them, saying, you got to give me more stuff, which is, I believe, why they ended up doing the rather excellent cover version on the first record, even if they can't pronounce vegan correctly.
Megan the Vegan.
Because again, Mike said, I'm not releasing it unless you give me, 3 more minutes or whatever. So I believe they were in that same quandary or same tension or problematic in the studio during that. So me being a vaguely mature adult by then, I guess I would have been maybe 30 years old at that point. When I moved to America in 94, I was 28. And of course, I'd done a bunch of studio stuff with the band that I was in, et cetera, et cetera. So I knew basically to stay the fuck away, that me hanging out in the studio with them was not useful or productive for them. So I'm presuming they asked me to do it. I can't remember. But I do remember they were going through horrible writer's block and desperately scrambling to fill up, whatever the requisite amount of time. So they asked me to do this thing. The horrible voice I'm using, I was trying to do a kind of BBC, kind of neutral, kind of British accent.
Mm-hmm.
I think I ended up trying to sound like Margaret Thatcher, which is, again, it's just my attempt to do a kind of BBC voice.
Yeah.
Consciously or subconsciously kind of copying Margaret Thatcher's voice. Would be a terrible place indeed.
Well, and it adds to the irony of the actual track and enhances the joke. You know what I mean?
So my memory of it is I did it all live in 2 takes. And the first take, because I wasn't aware of the pacing, I mean, I did one silently to myself as the track ran, and they told me kind of where to start. So I had no idea, how fast or slow. I can't remember how long the track was, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't remember. So I remember the first take, I was speaking too fast. So the first take ended many seconds before the music ended. So I thought, all right. So I said, all right, try it again. And I thought, all right, I'm going to speak a little bit slower. And that was it. That was 2 takes. There was no drop-ins. There was no redo that line. It was 2 takes live. And that was it. And I guess I got the second one better because the last kind of punchline, the last couple of sentences were just me, I guess. No. And then the only other thing I remember in the studio was, we were putting together, I don't know if it was the first or second of those AK compilations. I can't remember if it was Better Red Than Dead or the Red Menace one. But anyway, whatever one that had the propaganda track. And again, because they were didn't have any songs and were scrambling to write new songs, they'd originally promised me that they were going to do me an exclusive song. And of course, that wasn't possible. So they didn't have enough songs for their own record. So they did the 1 take at the end of whatever song it is, where instead of saying, you know, fuck off to Valhalla, whatever it was,
Yeah.
they buy a book from AK Press. So that was the take that was used on whatever compilation that came out on.
Yeah, I've got that compilation. I actually have a test pressing and a normal pressing of the double vinyl, because I'm a propaganda completist, as you might imagine.
Right, so it would have been the first one then.
Yeah, it's the
Dallas.
Yeah, the Dallas remix. The Dallas mix is what they called it on the back of that album. Nice, very cool.
But I think that was my, you know, that was my entire time in the studio. So it would have been, you know, an hour or something. And I say my memory is I tried to stay out of their way during studio time. I'm presuming we were hanging out when they were not officially in the studio during that time. And obviously I managed to impress them or strong arm them or cajole them into, you know, putting the AK Press stuff on the actual record, which was
nice.
fantastic.
Well, we've got the text, right? So it's from the Winnipeg Free Press in November of 1995. The name of the original article is "Clear Thinking in Troubled Times," which I had a heck of a time tracking down because of the archival paywalls of the newspaper and everything like that. So some folks up in Winnipeg did me some solids, and like with their subscriptions, they were digging through the archives and they got that text for me. But it's like a 12-paragraph essay. Were you involved in the editing of the text, or were you just handed like an edited script that the band put together for you?
No, that was all the band. I was just given the script, and yeah.
Okay, cool.
That was it.
Yeah, it's
Shell, and I said sure.
I love it. I want to know about touring. Tell me a little bit about what you remember about the Press's touring with the band over the years. Were you personally touring with them as well?
So I personally, we only and as AK Press, we only ever did the one tour with them, meaning the entire tour, and that was the Less Rock More Talk tour in whenever that was, probably also in '96, maybe in the summer or whatever. And officially, I was on tour being their merch person. And Craig from AK Press was part of the tour, but wasn't part of the tour. I mean, meaning he was there to sell books.
Yeah.
So it was me. So in effect, me, Craig, and Richard the roadie was the crew, and then there was the three in the band. So there was 6 of us in Richard's van, and I think there was a trailer, as is commonplace, you know, pulling the merch, which in this case was their T-shirts and records, and was the books. It was fucking fantastic. I mean, I think, again, I say people's taste is subjective. To me, that was the classic lineup of Propaganda, certainly my personal favorite, with John in the band. I think that's their best 2 records. And so I was in heaven. I got to see, you know, at the time, probably my favorite living band. You know, I got to see them however many dates it was. I got to see them live on the whole tour. The tour was great. I was still young enough that I didn't object to sleeping on floors, and me and Craig were always up early, and we were all doing exercises. We were always the first in the shower, and we would go out running and whatever. That was fantastic. Yeah, so I got to see them every night for whatever it was, 20 nights. They were also at the stage, they were kind of at that perfect stage, whereas before they became really big. All of the attendant problems, both for themselves and also for the audience. I mean, I've never liked being in bigger shows, so to speak. So they're the level where they were still playing, you know, in front of anywhere from say 200 to maybe 1,000 people. I mean, you know, in the bigger rock clubs on that tour. But it meant also realistically, what happened was that me and Richard were basically doing the stage security. Again, you're playing in small clubs. You're being security largely means, other than their paranoia of being attacked by hammerskins at every show, the security largely meant, we were stopping people knocking the mics into their faces. And, I mean, I remember they originally on that tour said they wanted no one on the stage and no stage diving. And that went out the window the first night. And so our job was just to make sure that people didn't trample the equipment, knock out the leads. Again, this was before they got much more sophisticated in terms of their backline and their, headphones in their ears and, whatever Spinal Tap style kind of radio mics for the guitar, kind of thing. So I said that tour was like was a punk rock tour, playing smaller venues. Again, a couple of venues we played in, very few people came, and some of the more out of the way places. It was fucking fantastic. It was great.
And that was like a confrontational Chris Hanna era too, right? Where he would be like talking back and forth with the crowd a lot, right?
Oh, very much so. So again, I say the paranoia about security. I don't mean that in a kind of pejorative, negative sense. There was a couple of shows where people were having a go, and I say, other than the odd, pushing people off the stage or dragging people, there was no fists thrown or whatever. There wasn't any much violence. But there was a lot of hostility in some of the gigs directed towards the band. I remember one of the gigs in Southern California, people were throwing meat. So, I got hit, and, after the show, we were like taking this meat, I don't know what it was, minced beef, it was like raw meat, scraping it off the speakers and that kind of thing. So, it was, but that's partly what I loved about them. It was like kind of, fuck you. They're playing this super accessible, popular, I don't know what it's called these days, skate punk, melodic punk. So the super accessible, popular music. They're playing it to a type of audience who is not your typical pre-politicized audience, shall we say. It's not like you're playing to the anarcho-punk crowd so I thought that was fantastic that they were using the music as, and their lyrics were not, and certainly in those days, the lyrics were not, apocryphal, or they weren't like, talking in allegories. It was like, Hail Selassie up your ass, fuck you, we're fucking feminist, pro-gay, vegans, if you don't like it, you can fuck off.
Yeah. And
to me, I thought that was fucking brilliant. And I say that's what attracted me to the band in the first place, beyond the music. What was the difference between them and NoFX or any of the 5,000, melodic, so-called, that Southern California melodic punk sound. I say, which personally I love the musical style.
Yep, me too.
And even the difference between, say, them and Bad Religion, who of course invented that sound. Bad Religion's lyrics were a lot more allegorical. They were a lot more, whereas Propaganda we're kind of like Crass in the sense of they were fucking in your face. There was no misinterpretation. You couldn't gloss over the fact that what they were saying was overtly political, in your face. I say it was fucking brilliant. And I remember chatting with them because there's been very few bands before or since that have done that. And the bands that had done it before them were obviously great inspirations to them. The two bands that spring to mind were Midnight Oil, the Australian rock band, who again were super overtly political. And the other band, which actually they introduced them to me, was the Canadian band Lowest of the Low.
Yeah.
And again, one of the greatest pleasures of the tour was at my insistent, presumably fairly fucking annoying request, is at one of the shows where there was like no one there, which was actually very few on that tour. But, they'll say there's one or two, there'd be like, 20 people in the audience kind of thing. So they did a Lowest of the Low cover version for me, which was like, oh.
Nice.
I remember they maybe even changed some of the lyrics about me getting a rim job.
What do you remember about like the vans and the rides? Like, what was that friendship like?
Um, it was great hanging out with them. It was also, there was the usual tensions. Being in a van with 6 people creates all kinds of tensions. I mean, whether they're your best friends or your closest relations, being cooped up, being with someone more or less 24/7 for an extended period of time is fucking stressful.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's be honest about this. There was the usual squabbles of who gets to sit in the front seat.
Yeah.
There was the squabbles over, or not squabbles, there was tensions because, they were young. They were kids. I think it was probably the first big tour they'd ever done. So it was a DIY tour, more or less. I mean, they had a booker who booked it all and that kind of thing. But, they were making it up and learning as they went along. And, looking back, I think there was a bunch of missteps. There was not any, I think they didn't treat Craig so well. Like Craig was as much a roadie, did some of the overnight drives. So he was as much part of the crew as myself or Richard. Craig wasn't paid at all on the tour, which I don't think is cool. I was paid only for the amount of T-shirts I sold. Which again is a very strange way of taking on a merch person. Again, irrespective of the other things I did on the tour, like security or whatever. I mean, I was paid on the amount of T-shirts, which again is a very bizarre, and again, perhaps just naive. This is the first time I've ever kind of done it on a serious way, but it meant that they wildly underestimated how popular they were. So I think at least twice on the tour they ran out of shirts. So again, that's not cool if I'm being paid per shirt that I can't remember what it was. Maybe I'm getting paid $1 a shirt. Whatever.
Yeah.
But it meant, for example, and I don't know what Richard was paid, but Richard was obviously paid a flat fee. It was Richard's van, and Richard was also doing the majority of the so-called roadie work. He was doing the majority of the driving. He was the most, well, actually, that's not true. Craig also knows lots about, how to string guitars and that kind of shit. But anyway, Richard, I don't know what Richard was paid. Presumably Richard was paid whatever Richard asked for. But I say me and Craig were not paid at all. I was only paid at the end of the tour. What I'm trying to say is, so one of the tensions was me and Craig had no per diems.
Right.
So Propagandhi always wanted to eat nice vegan food. So they would go to this, the nice vegan restaurant in every town. As you and your listeners are probably aware, eating in nice vegan restaurants is not the cheapest way of touring.
Right.
So there'd be this kind of weird apartheid system on the tour where there'd be the 3 band who were, ordering the finest vegan fare. And then it'd be the 3 crew who couldn't afford it, even though we were all vegans. Do you see what I mean? So there's this kind of weird apartheid system. This is when we ate out. Yeah. I'm not saying that if there was the venue paying, the food, we all got the food and Craig got it as well. So, but I'm just saying there's these things that I'm largely putting down to them being young. This is the first time they've ever done it.
Yeah.
Or kind of not cool. And me, Richard and Craig, who had obviously been in bands before, had done many tours before, we were aware that it wasn't cool.
Yeah.
Or not the way it should be done. So I say I'm not saying what a bunch of wankers Propagandhi were. They were much younger than us and they hadn't done it before, and we were older than them. And, we'd done it many times before. So anyway, whatever. That makes it all sound it was all negative.
No, not at all. I love those kinds of road stories.
But also,
too.
I think because of that, the thing of being them cooped up together, that was the end. It was obvious, say, the rift or the tensions between John and the other 2 were manifest on that.
Wow.
And in fact, I believe I was the promoter. I flew them out for the release party of that, the Better Red Than Dead, that Epitaph album, which was Propagandhi, the fantastic ABBA cover band that are on the album. I can't remember their name. Bjorn, Baby Bjorn, and the Gary Floyd band, Gary Floyd of the Dicks. And so I flew them out for that gig. I paid them. Again, they were totally cool about it. They said, all we want is the airfares, and we want, we have to rent this particular backline. Unsurprisingly, they were very particular about what the gear they wanted. So I paid their airfares, I paid their backline. And again, they were cool about it. They all slept on my tiny apartment, 1-bedroom apartment on my floor.
Yeah.
But that was the last ever John Samson gig with them.
Mm.
And I say, so on that tour earlier in the summer or the year before, whenever it was, I said that kind of split in the band was very apparent.
Yeah.
It was kind of like when he wasn't eating, kind of John would be hanging out with me and Craig and not with the band kind of thing. Which I say, I don't mean in a negative sense, but
yeah.
And I say for me, it was both a blessing and a tragedy, because I say, to me, it was those first two albums are the only two albums I really like of Propaganda. The blessing was, of course, I was a huge Weaker Thans fan, perhaps unsurprisingly. Curse was, for me, that was the end of Propaganda in terms of my personal musical enjoyment.
Gotcha. Did you keep in touch with any of the folks from the band over the years a little bit at all here and there?
Well, we did after the fact. Again, I remember, I got both sides of the story. I had both John and Chris, moaning to me at the time about each other and whatever about the breakup. And I say I was the kind of impartial, whatever, parent, since they were both my favorite sons.
Yeah.
So again, I wasn't taking sides. And obviously they were reasonably amicable. The first Weaker Thans record was on G7, etc. So, it wasn't like open warfare.
Right.
But it wasn't. It certainly wasn't friendly.
Yeah.
But anyway, be that as it may. So, we continued to work in the sense of we continued to provide literature. And I personally, tabled when I could, when they were in the Bay Area or whatever, both for the Weaker Thans and for Propaganda. So in one sense, it was a great split. Music aside, or personal musical taste aside, it was great. There was two kind of political bands going out there, spreading the good word and taking books on tour. So that was fantastic. I think the last time I ever saw Propaganda would have been it was at the launch, which is at Gilman Street, I think, which is the club, the All Ages Club in Berkeley, and for the Potemkin album.
Oh wow, okay.
And again, I was tabling at that, and I witnessed the end of their relationship with Fat Records.
Yeah,
because Fat Mike was behind me. Again, Mike didn't want to hang out. Again, the club I think officially holds like 300 or 400. I'm sure there was 500 or 600 people in Gilman Street, so it was horribly packed. So the only place to breathe would have been behind the book table, which was on the other side of the club from their merch table. And it was at that show where they, publicly from the stage, viciously attacked Mike. And I remember because Mike was fucking standing right next to me.
Wow.
And Mike ran out of the club in tears.
Wow.
I thought it was actually terrible. Again, I personally actually agree with their political criticisms, or shall we say, of Punk Voter and of aligning with the Democratic Party. Actually, I agree with it 100%.
Yeah.
I think the way that they publicly attacked Mike was, again, it's just not cool. It's, but I guess at that point they didn't give a fuck, and had obviously already decided that they were no longer going to be with Fat. So.
Wow. Yeah, and they're that kind of leads into their view of themselves, kind of like as like the North Korea of punk is kind of what they referred to themselves as for a while. Like there's like this they're just cast off isolationist kind of approach. You know what I mean?
I do. Do I? I think that's them making putting a positive spin on their own idiosyncrasies, shall we say?
Yeah.
Because they were always idiosyncratic. They always, you could say they were the North Korea of punk on those first two albums, and that they were very unusual.
Yeah.
In that sense. I mean, they're unusual within that genre of punk. And as I say, I think that's part of what made me attracted. But it was that mix of songwriting. As I say, for me personally, when John left the band, it took away all of that kind of melodic edge or the melodic side of it, and it was replaced with the more kind of thrash meets kind of prog rock. I remember when, I can't remember which one it was. Again, they being Propagandhi stayed with me. I think they were in the Bay Area for some reason. I can't even remember when it was. But the last time I ever saw them, they stayed in a different apartment, which was slightly bigger than the one that was before. So this must have been many, many years later. And I remember chatting to them, in between doing their laundry and the other things that you do for touring bands when they stay with you. That I said, I can't remember where I said Potemkin was either like Rush or Pink Floyd. And again, I meant it actually neutrally. I'm actually a big Rush fan personally, and I fucking hate Pink Floyd personally. But that's neither here nor there. But I can't remember which one I compared it to. And I remember saying that to Chris. And Chris was really pleased and took it as a compliment. Just like, oh, thanks.
Man, it's so amazing to me that you were at that Potemkin City Limits release show too. Like that's like your experiences in that specific decade, like the 94 to 2005 era. I mean, that's really, really cool. So many cool stories.
I don't know.
So lucky. Like it's just an amazing collection of stories. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, since you're a person who is involved in publishing and you've studied so many different topics, like the backstory of the narration that you did for Public Disservice Announcement. I'm wondering if you have any comments that you feel like listeners out there should know about like what was going on like in West Africa with regards to petroleum extraction in the 90s, and like kind of like maybe some context about what you remember about that time period that you feel like people should maybe know. Obviously, there's a lot of reading that people should do if they want to like learn about it a lot more in depth than the time we have available to us. But I wonder if you have any specific memories about some of the content that was going on within the track that you narrated.
Sure. Well, it's not necessarily memories, but it's like, what was going on then is going on now. Mm-hmm. It's meaning, what's going on then is going on now in the tar sands in Canada or whatever. It's basically, it's two things. One is extraction, meaning extraction of fossil fuels or any other, diamonds or you name it. Extraction mining typically takes place on, for want of a better term, third world countries or non-first world areas. Now, that could be, in the case of Canada, meaning areas which are supposedly or nominally under the control of First Nations, for example. Or it might be in Nigeria, which is where the shell stuff comes from. Mm-hmm. And that means two things. So firstly, as I say, it's always going to happen. It's basically the third world, so-called, or first world nations, or an indigenous, or whatever the right term is these days, are the ones getting completely fucked. Mm-hmm. And secondly, it's these large multinational corporations, whether it's Shell or the more modern versions that are now doing the extraction, both act like what they are, which is these private empires, which have their own private military, their own private security. But secondly, they can only do it in concert with the various states that they're operating within. And so in the case of Shell, it was actually, they were operating in Nigeria at the time, and it was the Nigerian military. They were actually going and slaughtering the indigenous populations who might be resisting having their their homelands, or the lands that they and their for many generations had lived in, whatever farmed or fished, are having it totally fucking destroyed by these extractive industries. And so it says the state is actually directly involved. So in the case of Canada, it's always the state, it's always the RCMP which goes in and actually does battle with the indigenous populations over, them blocking roads, or, trying to resist pipelines or extraction, etc., etc. And that, again, that was going on at the time in the 90s. You had the Oka, so-called the Oka crisis, or the incident, etc. So this has been going on across the planet for decades, actually since the dawn of empire. It's been going on for fucking thousands of years. But in the modern age, certainly since capitalism. And in the case of Nigeria, which is where Shell were drilling in this particular incident, there was one of the many multitudes of vocal opponents of what Shell were doing was this guy called Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was at the time one of Nigeria's most famous kind of writers. He was also, he was the kind of equivalent, I guess, today of someone like, say, Arundhati Roy, people may have heard of, who is both a famous writer in India, but also is very much involved in indigenous struggles, shall we say, in her native country. So Ken Saro-Wiwa was a world famous novelist, author, writer, and he was a very vocal opponent of what Shell was doing in Nigeria. He was assassinated by persons unknown, which is probably the Nigerian state, in the same way that most assassinations of the local peasants or whatever, or famous people, are actually done by death squads who are actually indistinguishable from the state. And so Shell felt compelled to. There was so much opprobrium and so much, public discontent, that it obviously reached, the mainstream, shall we say, that Shell felt compelled to do this international campaign of disassociating themselves. So what appeared in, you said it was the Winnipeg Free Press, also appeared in the New York Times. This was like a global campaign, because Ken Saro-Wiwa was a household name, not just in Winnipeg, but, across the world. So this was a global campaign of what these days would be called greenwashing, of Shell trying to claim that they're this super ecologically cool company that just provides local jobs and employment and is actually good for the country and good for the ecology and the habitat and is actually cool all around, and hence, all the bullshit and the propaganda about them, corporations and companies doing good should not interfere in politics and all that kind of bullshit. So, again, because the corporate world, which includes, of course, the Winnipeg Free Press, the New York Times, actually believes that Shell does it, they were happy to print this shite and take their advertising money and then carry on ignoring what's going on in the tar sands and everywhere else.
Amazing summation.
That's what they do.
Yeah, man, Ramsey, that was very, very well said. I really appreciate the overview of the time period as well. And Ken Saro-Wiwa, his execution was by hanging. I'm looking at some notes that I have about him as well. And, he was a spokesperson and president of an organization called the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People. He was very well known to lead nonviolent campaigns against the environmental degradation of Ogoni land, and his history and biography of the work that he was doing is really important to remember, and especially in the context of this particular song for fans of this band who might have never really dug into the backstory of what this was about. So I appreciate the really, really concise and clear overview. So thank you so much.
But again, I think one of the importance of what Propaganda were doing at the time was, it wasn't just that lyrically they were kind of in your face. It was that they actually provided for the resources, for the reading, that it actually came to the literature, that it wasn't just that they took books on tour. They were actually, part of that, disseminating those ideas beyond themselves. I think it was probably me that put them in contact with Chomsky or the native activist Ward Churchill, etc. But then they were actually taking this material and actually, again, helping to disseminate it to their fan base. And I said there's actually been very few bands that did that and that used their platform. And for them, again, one more anecdote of the tour. For them, it was also, I think, a learning process of actually what the power of having that megaphone, so to speak, or having that public pedestal actually has. So again, us wiser, us more experienced, older fucks on the tour, right? So right next to the merch stand, meaning, the table next to their merch, meaning selling their T-shirts and their records and CDs, was this big, massive book table. And again, we were taking the full spread of AK Press. We weren't just taking books on punk music or whatever, or, we were taking, you name it, we had it. And we said to them, look, whatever you say from the stage, you have the power, people will buy it. And they're like, no way, it doesn't work like that. And so we took the most obscure books that we brought on tour and we made a bet with them. We said, look, if you mention this from the stage, someone will buy it. So the one that I remember, there was a book that we were distributing at the time called The Early Homosexual Rights Movement. So pretty fucking obscure and not really, not directly relevant to today, even if one is, queer positive or whatever. So so we said, all right, mention this in the stage. So whether it was Chris or John, someone said, all right, check out the AK Press table at the back. And particularly, I really recommend this Early Homosexual Rights Movement. We fucking sold the 3 copies we had that night. And then we did it with all these, right, mention this one then. And I think I'm presuming to them, it was also partly that kind of realization that an aspect, shall we say, of the power that kind of culture can actually have. So
amazing. They did that for me personally. The early propaganda shows that I managed to see where there were still like book spreads at the show. I walked out of there with Chomsky book a couple of times. So it's one of those things where you never know what kind of impact you're going to have on a certain person standing in the room whose life may take a new turn that they might not have otherwise had. I mean, that's what's so important about this particular era of the band that you're talking about, but also people time and time again on this podcast have talked about how instrumental like that particular era of this band is in helping send them down a new road within their own life and their own ways of thinking and their own ways of living that they never would have found otherwise.
Absolutely.
Well, Ramsey, I am so grateful to you for your time and stories and memories of narrating a public service announcement on Let's Talk More Rock, being friends and colleagues and roadie with this band. The stories that you've told today, I've never really heard those kinds of stories before. So it's really cool to add like a new perspective on those 90s touring days, because the lore of the, band like bantering with the audience back and forth, like, not everybody can tell stories like that today. So I appreciate your memories, and I really appreciate you being here talking about your work with PM Press and AK Press and this band. So it's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast to fill in this piece of the story for me.
Likewise, thanks for having me, and I'm going to have to go back and listen to those records again.
People have the right to the truth, unvarnished, even uncomfortable, but never subjugated to a cause, however noble or well-meaning. They have the right to clear thinking. Slogans, boycotts, nations altogether, the oil would certainly continue flowing. The business would continue operating, the vast majority of the employees would remain in place. But the sound and ethical business practices synonymous with Shell, the environmental investment, and the tens of millions of dollars spent on community programs would all be lost. Again, it's the people of developing nations that you would hurt. It's easy enough to sit in your comfortable homes in the West, calling for sanctions and boycotts against the developing country. But you have to be sure that knee-jerk reactions will do more harm than good. Some campaigning groups say that we should intervene in the political process in developing nations. But even if we could, we must never do so. Politics is the business of governments and politicians. A world where companies use their economic influence to prop up or bring down governments would be a frightening and bleak one indeed.
All right. Thank you so much to Ramsey Kanaan for that wonderful conversation. Ramsey, you all know him. His voice has narrated a public service announcement from Shell on Let's Talk More Rock. You've heard it thousands of times at this point in your lives, and there's the story straight from his own memory and his own experiences. So I'm super grateful that we were able to track down Ramsey and get his take on life with propaganda in the 1990s. And coming out of that interview, you heard another cover that was from our pal Chris, who goes by the performance moniker Freakingsnap. Chris lives in Winnipeg. You've heard his experimental bleeps and bloops on this podcast now for a couple of years. And I do have to say that that was my favorite Freakingsnap rendition that has ever appeared on this podcast. So thanks again to Chris for coming through with a wonderful contribution in the style of cover that nobody but Chris can make. So that's our interview. Those are our covers. And Steve, we got a lot of ground to cover. What do you want to do next?
I think because we're going to be wrapping up Let's Talk More Rock, I think it would be fitting for us to do our top 5 of the album before we kind of get into the heavy lifting of this song. Wonderful.
Would you like to kick us off with your number 5?
Okay, so I had a lot. I struggled to pick my number 5. There was a few options that I probably could have picked, but I went with Preteen McCarthyist as my number 5.
Interesting.
And I went just simply because of that unbelievable Samson vocal in it.
Interesting.
I love that line. I feel like it just completes the song in a way that it just works. I don't know, but that's my number 5.
Very cool. My number 5 is Nailing Descartes to the Wall. And to me, this is sort of like a cool preview for like their later, heavier years. And Rio, San Atlanta, Manitoba could obviously also be another candidate for like the heavy one, but I like this song more than Rio, San Atlanta. So I went with this one as far as like the later years heavy stuff. But I chose this one because this was an episode that we really pushed ourselves on when we were making the podcast a few years back. And the interviews on that episode really stand out. We got a scholar of like environmental food practices and stuff like that. And I can't remember Dr. Lauren Corman's exact expertise off the top of my head at the moment, but that is one of my favorite interviews that I ever did for this podcast. And so that episode made me love this song way more. So this is actually my 5th favorite song because to me, this is like the definitive like food and animal agriculture episode that we made for this record. And that was such a core piece of what this record was about. And I just love that episode so much. So I slotted that one in as my number 5 pick because I just love the episode so much. And it kind of previews where they go later as a band. So that's my number 5. How about your number 4?
My number 4, I have a feeling is going to be on everyone's top 5 list. It's kind of it's a gimme, but I'm going with Resisting Tyrannical Government for my number 4.
Nice. What thoughts do you have on that one specifically?
I feel like because of, when this record came out and how old I was when it came out, I just feel like this was a particularly impactful song. And I kind of touched on it in a little bit in my conversation with Dave Zamboni, but having, being, 16 years old when this came out, and, when I was 16, I was, all my life was just playing hockey, essentially. So to have kind of that crossover where they're using the hockey references to really kind of get across the larger point in the song, I felt like the song was speaking to me at that point, at that age, and at that point in my life. I thought it was very crucial to my, future trajectory. So that's why I'm putting it at my number 4.
Awesome. And, just as an interesting little point, Resisting Tyrannical Government has an alternative version that was recorded in the initial recording process that I talked about with Ryan Green. So it's really cool to see that there's 2 versions of this song. One of them is on the Where Quantity is Job Number 1 compilation from the failed attempt to record Less Talk More Rock. So I just love when there's multiple versions of the same song. Like I love that Nation States has 2 versions as well. Also, my number 4 is The Only Good Fascist is a Very Dead Fascist. I think that it is a hilarious and wild song that has only gotten more relevant with time. And I think back on the interview that I did with Sue Lin about this song for that episode and how impactful it was to talk about our own personal experiences surrounding the existence of this song and what this song kind of did for us in our own lives. So I picked The Only Good Fascist is a Dead Fascist for my number 4.
I wanted to put that song in my top 5, but like it would have been like 5A. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was for all the reasons that you said, but yeah, I really wanted to get that in there.
All right, Steve, what is your number 3 for Less Talk More Rock top 5?
My number 3 has already been covered today. My number 3 is Nailing Descartes to the Wall.
Ooh, fantastic.
Because, the whole animal agriculture thing and food is, I feel very strongly about that stuff. Being vegan for a very long time. I think it's just and I do like the aggressiveness of the song. I think it becomes more effective on this album than it would on a future album. Because the rest of this album is kind of like, overall poppy, and you have like the Samson songs on it, which are as poppy as you could get with songs. So I feel like that really makes this song stand out more.
Wonderful. And I do look forward to hearing your own personal food journey whenever we get to the lower order episode. I think that would be a really good time when we do that episode in the future for you to tell your entire story. Because, we did a ton of animal agriculture episodes before you joined the show. So I'm actually kind of happy that we have one left in the tank. So that we can get into your own personal journey in the future. So that'll be a really fun conversation for us to hear about that. My number 3 is Less Talk More Rock. This song hit me at a really important time in my life whenever I felt like a goofy, awkward teenager lacking tremendous amounts of confidence, like romantically. And I know that that's not special. I know that everybody has those types of feelings, but I was frequently targeted for homophobic, slurs and attacks whenever I was a teenager. And so it was a really jarring experience for me to, to get called names a lot and to be like, well, what if what they're saying about me is actually true? And so songs like this were super helpful for me. It made me really examine sexuality in regards to society in general and also internally within myself. Made me look deeply at myself at a very young and vulnerable age. It also kind of made me realize that it's okay to have those uncertain feelings and it's healthy to not have it all figured out immediately. And it was really cool that one of my favorite bands was so blunt and open about their own experiences, especially like age dropping, like the exact ages that Chris was for certain experiences within the song always like completely blew my mind. So I thought this song was super brave, super interesting, very bold. And it also was very impactful for me in like examining my own life. So that's my number 3 title track, Less Talk, More Rock.
I mean, this is a complete tangent, but how do you feel about this song being the title track and like naming the album after this song?
Yeah, that's so interesting too, isn't it? Because this song, the mission of this record is written around the outside spine of the cover, and sexuality is only a tiny piece of the greater whole. You know what I mean? So I think that the Less Talk, More Rock title of the record is more all-encompassing than just this song. So I think that it's a great title for the record as a whole, because on the cover, you're going to get songs about anti-fascism, pro-feminism, animal liberation, and gay positive. So you're going to get all those things. And I think it's a narrower picture on the song, but I think it's a bigger picture for the record as a whole. So I really like the way that it tells you what the 4 mission statements are on the front cover in relation to the record, because then the song itself narrows it down to 1, but all the other songs touch on all the other ones. So that's kind of my play on the title and why it works as a title for the record as a whole. Instead of like just this song, which kind of narrows in on one of the 4,
Oh, I think you nailed it.
Oh, thanks. Well, I appreciate hearing that. That's just my theory. I could be completely off base. I sometimes am. Often am. Okay, Steve, what is your number 2?
So my number 2 and my number 1, I feel like go together.
Okay.
But I'm going to talk about number 2 because that's the one we're on. So my number 2 is Refusing to Be a Man.
Okay.
I feel like this is such an important song. Given it was released in the 90s,
mm-hmm.
I think today this song is more important than it's ever been.
Yeah.
With the current state of the world, with the absolute, hyper toxic masculinity narratives that are out there, I think this song is so important, and I don't think it gets enough credit for how good of a song it is and how important of a song it is compared to all the other ones on the record. I think it kind of gets forgotten about.
Yeah. And thinking about the history of this podcast, that Refusing to Be a Man episode is maybe the episode I got more positive feedback on than any episode we've ever made. It was mind-blowing to me, the amount of messages that we got after we released that episode. And to me, it's maybe one of the top 5 episodes that I feel like I've ever released on the podcast. So it was a well of depth and exploration and hard conversations, and it was amazing the amount of work that song inspired in me while attempting to make sense of that song. So your inspiration by that song really resonates with me, because whenever I started digging into that song to make an episode about it, it took months and months to be like quote unquote ready for that. So it did the exact same thing for me. So I appreciate your thoughts on that one.
It's kind of a, initially it wasn't like I've always enjoyed the song, and I'll always, it's always been in my top 5, but recently it's climbed further up in my top 5 because of the work that my wonderful partner here, Zoe, does at her work in, she does workshops with like the 12 to 15-year-old boys on how to combat and toxic masculinity and healthy masculinities and stuff. So it kind of resonates a bit more seeing all the stuff that she has to deal with at work on a daily basis and stuff like that. So I would very much at some point love to have her speak on this subject.
Fabulous. Well, you and she can absolutely do that. I look forward to that. That would be a remarkable Refusing to Be a Man appendix episode, I have no doubt. And honestly might even, bring you two even closer together, which I think would be such a beautiful experience hearing you two talk about that. Okay, so my number 2 is Resisting Tyrannical Government. I love this song very, very much. It is the best closing lyric to maybe any song ever. So that is my sole reason why it is my number 2.
I mean, I can't argue. It's in my top 5. So,
all right, give me your number 1.
My number 1, and I will bring this up later on when we talk about sequencing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But my number 1 song, and I'm gonna say it's my second favorite Propagandhi song ever.
Wow.
Is State Lottery.
Okay, sweet.
That is just an absolute perfect song.
Yeah, nice. Did you listen to the episode that we made on that one?
Absolutely. It's
amazing.
It's just the song from the lyrics to the music to everything as a package. It's a perfect song. And I can't, and the only reason it's not my number 1 favorite Propagandhi song is because Purina Hall of Fame exists.
Yeah.
If Purina Hall of Fame didn't exist, this would be my number 1 Propagandhi song.
Yeah, I get it. All right. Well, my number 1 is I Was a Preteen McCarthyist. I love the way that the song ends on a very positive note. It ends on a hopeful note. And so it gives us these like backstories and then talks about what we have to do in order to keep on, pursuing goodness within our own lives. So I love the way that it ends on that. And Propagandhi does that throughout their catalog. You got to keep on trucking anyway, like that kind of thing. So they have a long history of that. So I see that legacy in this song. I also love looking back on the little moments of life and realizing how much, you or I have changed, but also sort of honoring the bumpy path that you travel to get to where you are now in your life. So this is a really great song for helping me kind of like examine my roots, look at the bumpy path of life, celebrate the highs and learn from the lows, and set some goals for oneself moving forward. So Preteen McCarthyist is my number 1. So great top 5 there, Steve. I had a blast doing this.
I love doing these top 5s, and I hope people enjoy listening to them. But like, what does anyone care what my top 5 is?
Well, you're co-hosting this podcast, so I care. And if you and I are the only ones that ever hear this conversation, well, so be it, because we did it and we had fun.
It's just going to be the 2 of us and Matt Milkowski that hear this.
I know, exactly. Well, and John Grubb in England, and also Chris Freakingsnap in Manitoba, who I believe those are the folks that have like listened to every single episode.
So that's a solid 5 people.
I know, it's great. What's really fascinating to me that neither one of us put nation states in our top 5. Did you realize that?
I'm not surprised.
Interesting. That's very fascinating to me.
I mean, Nation States was the song that was always on the fat comps, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the time, and those fat comps were so popular back then that almost I feel like the songs on the fat comps wound up being the less desirable songs on the records, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think that nation states is less desirable per se, but whenever I was making my list, I felt like these other ones just had a lot more to say to me throughout my entire lifespan. You know what I mean? They were a little more personal. They were a
Oh, for
little
sure.
more touched my heart a little bit. Like obviously Nation States is an undeniable classic, but man, when you think about stuff like Less Talk More Rock or, Pre-Teen McCarthyist, those things really touched my heart a little bit more than
There's
Nation States. So
there's
that's kind of,
there's quality songs on the record. Like it's got a lot of really quality songs. And just going
yeah.
back to what I said, like those fat comps, I'm like, you think of a song like Mother Superior, great
Mhm.
song, but
Yeah.
like when I'm tossing on that record, like I'm like, oh, or this is another one. So off of I believe it was the third fat comp, Strung Out's version of Ultimate Devotion on
Oh,
that
yeah.
third fat comp was amazing. However, the version on the record was different, and I liked the original version more than the record version. So, there's these things with I have this thing with the fat comps where I just don't like the songs that were on the comp as much as I do on the rest of the record.
Yeah, man, I was on the Strung Out Facebook group recently, and someone tagged me, and they're like, "Who's going to do a Strung Out podcast like Greg does for Propagandy?" And they tagged me, and I was like so thrilled by getting tagged for that because I thought that Strung Out would be an excellent candidate for a band with an amazing discography and catalog to get the sort of song by song treatment. So I just wanted to give a little shout to those friends over there, and I hope that somebody is crazy enough to talk about Strung Out's immense discography on a song by song basis, because I would actually listen to that podcast in the future. So should we go back and talk about the song that we are here to discuss?
The environmental investment and the tens of millions of dollars spent on community programs would all be lost. Again, it's the people of developing nations that you will hurt. It's easy enough to sit in your comfortable homes in the West, calling for sanctions and boycotts against a developing country, but you have to be sure that
a public disservice announcement from Shell.
To be honest, I forgot that's what we were doing. We've been recording this one for so long.
I know. Well, we're eventually doing it here. So here it comes, everybody. We did a nice little breakdown of it with Ramsey Kanaan in the interview. So, and we talked a little bit about Matt Milkowski's interpretation of this song based on his intro that he wrote for his cover. There's so much more here, Steve. It's terrifying. The song or interlude, essentially, is an adapted excerpt from an article that was published in the Winnipeg Free Press on November 21st, 1995. The article was called Clear Thinking in Troubled Times, and it essentially is a statement written by Shell in the aftermath of the murder of an activist named Ken Saro-Wiwa in Ogoniland in Nigeria, in the Niger Delta. So, who is Ken Saro-Wiwa? He was alive from 1941 to 1995 when he was killed. He was a Nigerian writer, television producer, and environmental activist. Ken Saro-Wiwa was an Ogoni member, an ethnic minority in Nigeria whose homeland is called Ogoniland in the Niger Delta. That region has been targeted for massive crude oil extraction since the 1950s, and the environmental damage and devastation of the landscape is immense. There are so many documentaries about the decades of oil extraction and the environmental catastrophes that have happened in Ogoniland. So you should definitely find those out there, listeners, if you haven't. Ken was a spokesperson and then president for an organization called Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People. And he led a nonviolent campaign against environmental destruction of his land and water in Ogoniland by the multinational petroleum industry, most notably Royal Dutch Shell. And he criticized the Nigerian government for reluctance to enforce environmental regulation on the foreign petroleum industry that was operating in the area. And during the peak of his campaign and protests, he was tried by a special military tribunal for allegedly masterminding the murder of the Ogoni chiefs at a pro-government meeting, and he was hanged in 1995 by the military dictatorship of General Sani Abacha. So now that we know a little bit about who Saro-Wiwa was, what he did, and what he was doing, it's important to turn to the Shell response that is featured in this song. So after Saro-Wiwa died, the core text that Propaganda summarizes in the song was published. And as discussed in the interview with Ramsey, his reading was somewhat edited and pared down. So I actually went into the Winnipeg Free Press archives with the help of some locals in Winnipeg with access to the Winnipeg Free Press's archival site. Got a copy of the original article as it appeared in 1995, and I recorded myself reading the entire article. Because the version that appears on the record is not the whole thing. So it's about 4 minutes long. So if listeners out there don't want to hear me read an entire public announcement from Shell, skip forward 4 minutes, and then Steve and I will be back. So here is me reading this statement. Clear thinking in troubled times. In the great wave of understandable emotion over the death of Ken Saro-Wiwa, it's very easy for the facts to be swamped by anger and recriminations. But people have the right to the truth, unvarnished, even uncomfortable, but never subjugated to a cause, however noble or well-meaning. They have the right to clear thinking. The situation in Nigeria has no easy solutions. Slogans, protests, and boycotts don't offer answers. There are difficult issues to consider. First, did discreet diplomacy fail? Perhaps we should ask instead why the worldwide protests failed. Our experience suggests that quiet diplomacy offered the very best hope for Ken Saro-Wiwa. But as worldwide threats and protests increased, the government position appeared to harden. As Wura Abiola, daughter of the imprisoned unofficial winner of the last Nigerian presidential election, said, "The regime does not react well to threats." I believe that this is the way of showing that they will not listen to threats. Did the protesters understand the risk they were taking? Did the campaign become more important than the cause? There have also been charges of environmental devastation, but the facts of the situation have often been distorted or ignored. The public, who rightly care deeply about these issues, have too often been manipulated and misled. There are certainly environmental problems in the area, but as the World Bank survey has confirmed, in addition to the oil industry, population growth, deforestation, soil erosion, and overfarming are also major environmental problems there. In fact, Shell and its partners are spending US $100 million this year alone on environment-related projects and US $20 million on roads, health clinics, schools, scholarships, water schemes, and agricultural support projects to help the people of the region. And recognizing the solutions need to be based on facts, they are sponsoring a US $4.5 million independent environmental survey of the Niger Delta. But another problem is sabotage. In the Ogoni area, where Shell has not operated since January 1993, over 60% of oil spills were caused by sabotage, usually linked to claims for compensation, and when contractors have tried to deal with these problems, they have been forcibly denied access. It has also been suggested that Shell should pull out of Nigeria's liquefied natural gas project. But if we do so now, the project will collapse, maybe forever. So let's be clear about who gets hurt if the project is canceled. A cancellation would certainly hurt the thousands of Nigerians who will be working on the project and the tens of thousands more benefiting in the local economy. The environment, too, would suffer, with the plant expected to cut greatly the need for gas flaring in the oil industry. The plant will take 4 years to build. Revenues won't start flowing until early next century. It's only the people and the Nigerian government of that time who will pay the price. And what would happen if Shell pulled out of Nigeria altogether? The oil would certainly continue flowing. The business would continue operating. The vast majority of employees would remain in place. But the sound and ethical business practices synonymous with Shell, the environmental investment, and the tens of millions of dollars spent on community programs would all be lost. Again, it's the people of Nigeria that you would hurt. It's easy enough to sit in our comfortable homes in the West calling for sanctions and boycotts against developing countries. But you have to be sure that knee-jerk reactions won't do more harm than good. Some campaigning groups say we should intervene in the political process in Nigeria, but even if we could, we must never do so. Politics is the business of governments and politicians. The world where companies use their economic influence to prop up or bring down governments would be a frightening and bleak one indeed. Okay, so we're back. That was me reading the 1995 original article that Propaganda adapted for the record. And interestingly, Shell is still dealing with these issues today. They are still, sort of on the defensive, releasing statements once in a while about environmental catastrophes around the world. And they are still releasing defensive position statements about this issue pretty much to this day, it seems. And I was digging around in the internet as I do for this podcast, and I found a 2010 video that Shell released talking about what the real problems are in Nigeria, including vandalism and theft of crude oil. So whenever called out for issues, Shell always has a statement. They always have a defensive position about why they're not really the problem. And if you go on YouTube and look up and search Shell film about illegal refining in the Niger Delta, you'll find the video that I'm talking about. So what I did is I pulled an instrumental version of this song that a listener of the podcast made, where they extracted the vocals out of the song. And so I pulled a couple of things that Shell has released as recently as like 10 years ago. And I did a little revised 2023 version of this song using the actual audio from Shell's video. So here's my little revised version of this song that I made.
Think crude theft has been on the increase, and it is really very dangerous for the industry. It is terrible for the environment. A lot of our spills are occurring because of violence and vandalism. A lot are occurring because of crude oil theft.
More than 70% of all oil spilled from the facilities of the Shell Petroleum Development Company in the Niger Delta over the last 5 years was from sabotage or leaks caused when thieves damaged pipelines and wellheads. In 2009, these two causes alone accounted for 98% of SPDC spills. Here, CNN showed young men risking their lives refining diesel from stolen crude. In August 2010, CNN reported the terrible environmental impact of oil theft and illegal oil refining.
All right, so interestingly, their entire approach is denying they ever do anything wrong and instead blame all problems on sabotage. And then I found another documentary on YouTube made by The Guardian showing from the air, from like a helicopter, the illegal refineries that are in the bush in Nigeria. And these do exist. So Shell, when they talk about like oil, like theft and illegal refineries, like those things actually exist. I could see them in this documentary that is being featured. But the pipelines in Nigeria run straight through the middle of villages. Like there's footage of like the Guardian film crews like standing on top of the pipeline that's buried under the ground, running through the middle of a totally normal village. And if a little puncture in that pipeline happens, then all of a sudden like normal villages are just covered in oil. And they're saying that like illegal bush refiners are the problem, because like when illegal bush refiners are destroyed, it devastates acres of landscape. But what's super interesting is that the illegal refiners are almost certainly rich people because in order to be an illegal oil refiner in the Niger Delta, you have to have a barge boat that costs over $15,000. As of several years ago, it's probably way more expensive than that now. And they have to buy off the cops. They have to buy off the military. And so according to documentaries, I'm seeing the illegal refining and theft of oil, which is the worst in Nigeria of anywhere on earth that digs for oil. It's done by people with means. So whenever they talk about the theft of oil and the vandalism and things like that, I feel like the propensity is to maybe blame people who are like, poor living in these villages around the area. But the people who are doing the illegal like refining of oil are rich people. So it's a very fascinating, very disturbing, very tragic series of events that goes on in these small villages. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, I think it applies to everything, like large scale theft in quotations is always done by people with large resources.
Yeah, you have to, because like these boats, I mean, you have to get the oil that you like siphon off from these pipelines. You have to move it. You know what I mean? That is not easy. You can't just do that in places without proper infrastructure built in. And the way that it's done is on barges, on water. So it's a really interesting topic that is extremely difficult. And discussing something at like a multinational oil company's presence, exploitation, and complicity in crimes in countries that I know very little about, it seems almost like the mission of so many of this band's songs, but while I don't like love this song, it's kind of funny that this like throwaway interlude almost that Ramsey said was made very last minute in order to make the record something a little bit longer that Fat Records felt good about releasing into the world as a full-length release. It's still being like, hey, Greg, you're an idiot. You have to keep learning and learn something new. So that was a really interesting a moment for me. What were your thoughts on the song, like growing up as you would like listen to it? Was this a skipper for you? Would you let it play through? What were your thoughts on this for the last 20 something years?
I'm not a skipper. I don't like to skip anything. So, whether I enjoy it or not, I power through. However, I think this is an important track on the album for educating people about this, because when you're 15 or 16 years old and this record comes out, chances are you're not going to know much about this. Mm-hmm. Growing up in suburban North America or wherever,
right?
So I feel like it's super important. And this next part here is it's maybe a segue into your sequencing thing, but
yeah,
this song I feel like makes nation states more effective.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's Royal Dutch Shell is an absolutely massive international corporate entity with global influence and reach around the entire world that clearly had some say and sway within governments in the countries that they operate. So I get that for sure. I was thinking about this the other day because we'll talk about this later, but I don't think this should have been made a song on the record. I feel like they should have used this topic and written lyrics over the top of what is known as contest song. And I think they should have used contest song and written an actual song about this exact topic and murder of Ken Saro-Wiwa and Royal Dutch Shell's complicity within Nigeria. That's what I think this topic should have been addressed, as I think they should have used contest song for this topic. Does that make sense to you?
It makes perfect sense, but here, because this is an ongoing situation, there's always room to revisit.
Isn't that crazy how it just keeps happening over and over and over? I mean, I couldn't believe it whenever I started finding documentaries from like 2020 and 2021 addressing this exact same issue. And I was like, come on, it's just so disappointing. But I do want to give a little bit of detail about Nigeria that I think will be useful to listeners. So I did some digging and I found a great article from The Guardian called "The Village That Stood Up to Big Oil and Won," which gives some excellent overview of the history of Nigeria and the oil extraction industry. So pardon me for going down a very in-depth exploration here for a moment. Is that okay with you if I drop some stuff that I found?
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so first, Nigeria is the most populated country in the African continent. Okay. It is Africa's largest oil-producing country with 3 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, which is monstrous, like huge, absolutely crazy huge. Each day, 1.5 million barrels of oil are pumped from the ground in the southern Niger Delta region. Nigeria, since 1956, when Shell discovered oil in the region, the industries pumped the region for profits and propped up a rapidly growing Nigerian economy. And by the year 2000, oil accounted for 40% of Nigeria's GDP. Regulations were very relaxed. Corruption was extremely rampant, and aging pipelines, which you can see in the documentary that I referred to earlier, are very infrequently properly maintained. And in the last decade, this article is from like 2017, I think. Recently, in the last like 10, 15 years, thousands of oil spills have occurred in the Niger Delta. So Shell is particularly culpable in these spills. The company has publicly reported over 1,000 oil leaks since 2011, amounting to around 17.5 million liters of oil spilled in the region. And if you look at documentaries on YouTube, you can just see that landscape is just black, like coated with oil across, huge stretches of like terra firma land. Okay. And the pollution has sparked many local uprisings and attacks on oil sites that are often violently put down by the Nigerian security force. So let's talk about 1995 to 2017. So a 2017 Amnesty International article called "Investigate Shell for Complicity in Murder, Rape, and Torture." Amnesty International states that they are calling on Nigeria, the UK, and the Netherlands to launch investigations into Shell and over its role in a swath of crimes committed by the Nigerian military government in the oil-producing Ogoni land in the 1990s. And the Nigerian military's campaign to silence the Ogoni people's protests against Shell's pollution led to widespread and serious human rights violations. And then the Amnesty International report says that the evidence they have reviewed shows Shell repeatedly encouraging the Nigerian military to deal with community protests, even when it knew the horrors it would lead to, such as unlawful killing, rape, torture, and destruction and burning of villages. And that was a statement by Audrey Goffrin, the director of global issues at Amnesty International. And Shell provided the military with material support, including transportation, and paid a military commander notorious for frequent human rights violations. And they say that Shell played a key role in the events in the Ogoni land in 1990s, which is grounds for criminal prosecution, and that the Nigerian government's campaign against the Ogoni people culminated in the execution of 9 Ogoni men, including Ken Saro-Wiwa that I introduced earlier. And the executions were following a unfair trial. And in 2017, the widows of 4 of those 9 men filed a writ against Shell in the Netherlands, accusing the company of complicity in the deaths of their husbands. So there is a massive history behind this topic, Steve. And, digging into something as in-depth as this is really daunting, because no matter what we say and report on in a podcast like this, which is essentially a music podcast, no matter what we say and do, we're going to get it wrong. So as always, we have to encourage people to continue doing their own digging. But the protests of the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people, in January 93, they were like trying to expel Shell from the region. And, Shell publicly downplayed the environmental damage it causes, but internal documents reported by Amnesty International report that senior staff knew that Mossop had a legitimate grievance and they were highly concerned about the poor state and maintenance of the pipelines. And in 1990, Shell requested security protection from an elite paramilitary force called the Mobile Police when peaceful protests were taking place in the region. And the Mobile Police attacked the village with guns and grenades and killed around 80 people and torched almost 600 houses, and then dumped a lot of the bodies in the river. So there is a long trail of destruction for these things. And, obviously everybody should really do a lot of their own digging on this. But Ken Saro-Wiwa was a leader fighting for the safety and security and preservation of his home and the future livelihoods of all the people. And this is carried on in his family because to this day, Ken Saro-Wiwa Jr. is an advisor to the president in Nigeria, who is still working on this issue. So Amnesty International has called for investigations to be launched in Nigeria, where the crimes occurred, as well as in the UK and the Netherlands, where Shell is headquartered. But this is a very, very long and troubling history that listeners out there, I would encourage them to go and watch some of those documentaries that I was talking about, because they're super good.
The amount of gaslighting that Shell does is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's and like I said, man, I've been like watching these documentaries and finding these articles for days, and I'm skipping countless things just in the for the sake of time, for what we're doing here. But if anybody out there goes and digs into the history of this more, you're going to find an unreal amount of information. So definitely go and do that. So you have any other thoughts on any of those lyrics or the stories or anything that you found, or do you want to talk about the music or anything like that? I'm up for whatever.
I'm just curious too, we've already established that there's literally 5 people listening to this right now, but on the off chance that there's more than 5 people listening to this.
Yeah.
What are the chances that you think that we have someone listening to this that's saying, you know what? I support Shell.
I mean, Shell's actions fundamentally benefit probably most of the people who listen to this. When you're on E driving around in your car in freaking Kansas City or Washington DC, and you roll up into a gas station, the chances of thinking about where did this oil come from in 2023? Did it come from a very devastated Niger Delta region? I doubt that question goes through the minds of many people who are listening to this podcast. So that is my hunch, is that it really we benefit from all of these things in the form of plentiful and available gasoline and oil and products made from petroleum in general. But we are the beneficiaries in this society of a lot of the at the expense of a lot of people around the world.
In a world filled with awful people like the Shell people, we should all strive to be more like Matt Milkowski's dad.
Yeah. And definitely go and learn about some of the events in Agoniland. There's so many good reporting documentaries out there that are all like reasonably length too, like 15 to 20 minute long stories showing to this day what the devastation of like the Bush refineries of like people with means stealing quote unquote stealing from the pipelines and then the oil spills that result, and then the villages that get destroyed, and how the people that always pay the biggest price are the people without the means to fight it. And so Ken Saro-Wiwa and what he was doing and what that organization does is trying to reverse that trend. So it's super important to learn about It's not exactly fun to learn about, but I would definitely encourage people to do a little bit more. But you want to talk a little bit about the music of this tune?
I would love to, because it has some of my favorite musical elements on the whole album.
Okay, tell me about it.
Let's just talk about the effective use of the chainsaw.
Oh yeah, so good, right? Because that goes beyond the oil industry. It talks about the clear cutting of things like, huge old growth forests for the sake of paper products. You know what I'm saying? Like there's so much more to it.
It's unbelievably effective. I remember, listening to this as 16, 17 years old, and just like I just felt like the chainsaw really resonated with me to kind of drive the point home even further.
Yeah, I agree. The honking as well is interesting. I love the sound effects in the back of this. And then there's like gunshots and explosions. So we got the chainsaw, we got the honks, we got the gunshots, we got the bang and boom explosions. For the bass, we've got that clowny, goofy, like almost like circus like sound with the little, like almost like a little monkey with like the little cymbals clanging together. It kind of feels like that. And whenever I interviewed Sue Lin about Only Good Fascist, we talked kind of about the almost like the silliness of the music of that one. And so this song kind of speaks to that sort of tone of performance, just to kind of like draw you in with like some comedy before addressing something so much bigger than that. You know what I mean? So it's like a really effective use of like comedic style music to hammer home something important.
It's a great juxtaposition of kind of feelings.
Absolutely. So I think that this song, the history of this song is kind of interesting as well. I think this music was originally used to kill time during shows while Chris was tuning his guitar or something like that, because a notable way that I found this music being used was recorded during a notorious mid-1990s performance at Gilman Street, where John and George, during a very contentious and conflict-ridden set at Gilman, started playing this song, and Chris started singing "America Rules" over the top of it at an audience that was exceptionally confrontational. So I wanted to sample the "America Rules" audio here, because you can hear that this song and this music was around kind of like as a set filler, I almost think, during tuning. So here's what "America Rules" from the mid-1990s at Gilman Street sounds like.
Fucking homophobic, you're probably racist. Yeah, why don't you get the fuck out of here? Why are you here? Like, I wonder why half you are here. But fuck you, you're fucking, what, why? America rules? Is that why? Is that why? What? Why don't you start singing the fucking anthem all together? Fucking a bunch of Captain O'Grady lovers. Captain O'Grady fucking comes home, head of the fucking Air Force walks up, tells America it's a fucking justification for having more funding to your fucking military. And why? Because it's an uncertain and dangerous world, he says. And what do they want to do? What interests do they want to maintain? They want to make sure they keep this a fucking uncertain and dangerous world. Fuck you. Fuck you. America rules. America rules. America rules. America rules. America rules. America rules. For all the pro-Americans, our van is the blue one outside.
All right. Well, Steve, what an adventure for this episode. A almost like a throwaway track turned into something so much that leads to so much research and learning for myself. It's pretty powerful if you think about it.
I'd say that's kind of the MO of the show and the band as a whole, something that's like a short kind of insert into something we've taken and really explored it to, and with this, like we're touching on maybe 5% of it.
I know. Like decades and decades of environmental devastation. Like just going and watching YouTube videos from a helicopter flying over Ogoni land in Nigeria. Like everybody will see exactly what I mean. We are talking about an absolutely like blitzed landscape that is just black on the ground. And you know that if you were walking around on the ground in like shoes and boots, that you would just have oil coated to your footwear. I mean, it is just so it's wild just to see it. So I encourage everybody out there to do it. I couldn't find anything good for commentary about this actual track in question on YouTube, but the America Rules recording from Gilman has a ton of them. So I just have a couple comments there. Someone says, wow, I'm honestly speechless. I can't believe this recording exists. This is punk rock history. Thank you for uploading this. And someone said, it's great to hear John Kay joining in with Chris and baiting the crowd. I didn't know he participated. Thanks very much for the upload of this priceless artifact. So, Steve, now we're going to get into something controversial here. Me personally, I would not have included this song on the record. I would have developed an actual song out of the music from Contest Song, re-recorded Contest Song, and put that on the record. And I honestly also would re-sequence the entire record if I was in charge of this album. So would you like to, push back against my desire to remove this song from the record entirely?
Yes. So I would leave it on the record because, like I mentioned earlier, the kind of hokiness of the music in this song and the way this track ends elevates Nation States. When Nation States kicks in with that guitar part,
yeah,
it really elevates that song to another level and makes it far more effective. So that's why I think this song is important on the record, and I think why the sequence of those two songs together is very important.
Yeah, I really can't argue with you a whole lot there. You haven't changed my mind. I still would love to hear a topic about Ken Saro-Wiwa's murder sung over the Contest Song musical performance. But your point is very well taken. I don't have a rebuttal per se.
And just to say, like, I'm not against them doing a song about this, but I think for what it is, it's super important for the record. Like it acts as a good break between the first part and the last part that just elevates Nation States.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to think about needing a break on a 25-minute record.
But you're being presented with a lot of information in this record.
Yeah.
And not that this is a break, because this is obviously more information, but it just takes because of the way the music is,
yeah,
it just makes it feel like it's more lighthearted while delivering that. And I don't know, I just feel like without this song, Nation States doesn't hit.
Okay, interesting. Well, I mean, because a version of Nation States does exist on the I'd Rather Be Flag Burning 10-inch without this particular song leading into it. So there is a version that exists without this actual buildup. And I'm just looking at the and it looks like though there is a sort of interlude that leads into it though, a little untitled instrumental after the overtly political but oh so intensely personal song Mutual Friend. But then there's also that little interlude, I think, and then Nation States before that. So that's kind of an interesting thing, that a couple of different versions of Nation States exist with a couple of different intros. So I can definitely see your point about building up to that one. Okay, cool. I like that. Would you resequence Let's Talk More Rock as a whole record if you were in charge of everything?
I know you feel very strongly about this.
Very strongly. I'm obsessed with it.
And here is where I'm going to tell you that you're 90% wrong.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The only thing that I would resequence on this record is I would flip State Lottery and Refusing to Be a Man.
You and I are 100% on board with that. Okay, so that's fine. Do you want to hear my order?
I would love to hear your order so I can tell you that it's wrong.
Okay, I'm fine with being wrong. I think it's great. So I would open the record with People's History because of that way that guitar riff kicks in, and then the music kicks in and it's all powerful and fast. I would open the record with that because it's a big picture mission statement about the entire population of the world. Then I would go into Resisting Tyrannical Government, then Nation States.
Okay, so I would, if I could pause there, People's History of the World.
Yeah.
Great song. However, I can't see that as an album opener because of the guitar tone in that opening. I don't feel like it's a powerful guitar tone at all.
Just that little quiet part that leads into it?
No.
Oh man.
I think you have to start your album with a far more impactful sound when you're coming off when you're putting out an album of this magnitude. And I don't think that guitar tone at the beginning of that song works for kicking off this album.
Okay. All right. That's an interesting, fair point. But I've got 3 bangers in a row here. People's History, Resisting Tyrannical Government, and Nation States are my top 3. And then I slow it down and go into Let's Talk More Rock and then Gifts. But then I kick it back in with PC Fascist and Descartes. And then I go to Pretty McCarthyist before slowing it down to Anchorless. So I swap the order of Anchorless and Gifts on the record. And then Rio San Atlanta into Good Fascist, and then Refusing to Be a Man into State Lottery. So I like my track listing here, but I know that that's a controversial thing, and it totally would change the history of the entire record, which obviously is completely ridiculous to even ponder at this point.
I'm interested in your swapping Gifts and Anchorless.
Because I think Gifts I like Gifts way more as a song.
Really?
Yeah, I just like Gifts more as a song. It hits me more, and I think that having that follow a really melodic Let's Talk More Rock is it just is a better pairing for me than Anchorless. I've actually made this playlist many times, and I've swapped around the order of this record in a bunch of different iterations, and this is the one that I have landed on after 2 years of trial and error in sequencing Let's Talk More Rock. This is how ridiculous my life got for a while whenever I was like in the heat of making this podcast obsessively, that I resequenced all of the records, and this is my favorite one for this record.
I mean, I could see how the songs flow based off of your order here. But I think the narrative that they're presenting with their original sequencing, I think it works.
Okay, well, I'm gonna make you test my playlist here, because don't knock it till you rock it entirely. So I'm gonna force my playlist down your throat so that you actually experiment with this and that you can just kind of see what I was going for. And then just experience the flow of it, because I like it, but it's totally okay.
I'll listen to it. I got the record on back here, so I'll just move the arm in accordance to your playlist. It'll take me an hour and a half to listen to it, but
25 minutes. What would you rate this song if you could rate it in our discography ranking system of our very flawed and imperfect and totally improvised and unscientific measurement system?
I'm rating this at a 1.5.
All right. Well, I'm going to give it a 1. So what a great episode, though.
But I don't want, I rated a 1.5, but I still think it's important.
Yeah, but what do you like less than this? If this is a 1.5, you have to have stuff that you like less.
It's not about, here's the thing, it's not about whether I like it or not. That's irrelevant.
Okay. I can see this.
It's about what this track brings to the album.
Okay,
Like,
yeah.
you know, like, yeah, sure, it's not my favorite thing to listen to or whatever, but I feel like it brings a lot to the album, and its place in the album, I think, can't be replaced with another song. So, you know, like I rated a 1.5 because, yeah, I'm not, you know, like I'm not tossing it on, and this is the first track I'm listening to. You know what? Like, public disservice announcement. I'm on a road trip. I'm putting this on a playlist. Like, no, that's not happening. But
Right.
I understand that it's a super important track for the album. And like, so yeah, I rated a 1.5 because that's, you know, I'm not listening to it, you know, outright. But in terms of the importance of the album, it probably ranks at like a 3.5 in terms of album importance.
I like this song more than This Might Be Satire.
Okay.
From How to Clean Everything. So I'm good with that. Because I do like it more than another song. So I like this song more than This Might Be Satire. That's what I'm sticking with here.
Here's a hot take. I think I like almost every song on this album more than I like every song on How to Clean Everything.
Awesome. Well, this was an excellent record. I'm so glad that we now have the entire thing represented with episodes. I am so just beyond thrilled that we got the narrator of this song, Ramsey Kanaan, who was enthusiastic and excited to come on the show and tell stories. So what a thrill to have the actual narrator on the episode to revisit something that he did like 27 years ago. What a thrill.
Honestly, like, I know you're not going to be happy about this, but like,
oh God,
huge shout out to you for just going above and beyond with this. Like, you're always able to get awesome guests, and the amount of work that you put in to this show is unbelievable. People don't even understand how much work Greg puts into this show, but Greg absolutely needs to be celebrated, and his work needs to be recognized, because this show has given a lot to a lot of people, and it's all because of Greg's hard work.
Man, thank you so much. Well, and even though I ranked this song a 1, I spent weeks trying to get covers for this episode. I was like, who wants to do a cover for something that's not even a real song? And 2 people did it. And that's like insane to me that they're actually good covers too, which is another mind-blowing thing. But also the fact that, like, one of the things I've always kind of prided myself on for doing this show is, even if it's a song I don't love, I like Woe Is Me from the I'd Rather Be Flag Burning 10-inch. You know what I mean? I don't love that song. I don't love This Might Be Satire, but like, I put my full effort, as much as I possibly could give in preparation for that, into those episodes. So even if I'm ranking a song a 1, I'm still trying to go as hard on that episode as I do on, you know, something like Potemkin City Limits. You know what I'm saying?
No one goes harder in the corners than you.
Rock on. Well, Steve, I'm looking forward to hanging out this Thursday at the Zambonis here in Buffalo, New York. Thank you to everybody out there for listening to this episode. If you've made it this far, you are a true Propagandy Pod champion. If you want to shoot us an email, you can at propagandypod@gmail.com, or you can find us on social media at propagandapod. And I think we joined Blue Sky. So if anybody's on Blue Sky, you can find Steve and I on Blue Sky now as well. But yeah, Steve, another great hang. We wrapped up a record. We ranked our top 5s, and we had a really great chat about an important topic. So thank you so much for the wonderful hang today. I really appreciate your time, man.
This was awesome. I had a great time doing this episode.
Hi there. My name is Chris Hanna. I'm from the band Propagandy, and I'm going to show you the technique required to play the solo from the beginning of the song Dear Coach's Corner, from the LP, CD, and cassette supporting cast. Now, this solo requires a commitment and a discipline to mechanics that is second to none. So I suggest that you start practicing your guitar, and then I'll show you the solo. the progression here is very complex. So first start with your right hand. You start the solo with your right hand, and your left hand around 6 to 8 inches near the fretboard, hovering above, say, the 1st to the 5th fret. And you go through it very methodically, and repetition is the key here. So let me just show you the solo in its entirety. Okay.
He missed his grip, and his foot slipped on the cobbles as inexorably threw on ice. As it slid towards the tram lines, his other leg gave way and Berlioz was thrown across the track. Grabbing wildly, Berlioz fell prone. He struck his head violently on the cobblestones, and the gilded moon flashed hazily across his vision. He just had time to turn on his back, drawing his legs up to his stomach with a frenzied movement, and as he turned over, he saw the woman tram driver's face, white with horror above her red necktie, as she bore down on him with irresistible force and speed. Berlioz made no sound, but all around him the street rang with the desperate shrieks of women's voices. The driver grabbed the electric brake, the car pitched forward, jumped the rails, and with a tinkling crash, the glass broke in all of its windows. At this moment, Berlioz heard a despairing voice, "Oh no!" Once more, and for the last time, the moon flashed before his eyes, but it split up into fragments and then went black. Berlioz vanished from sight under a tramcar, and a round, dark object rolled across the cobbles, over the curbstone, and bounced along the pavement. It was a severed head.
The United Nations says this is just one of the places where decades of devastating environmental damage and pollution has been caused by the oil company Shell. It's Ogoni, in the heart of Nigeria's vast oil-producing region, filmed by our crew in June last year. The UN report released last week says it will cost $1 billion and 30 years to clean up the mess. But local leaders say the report, which cost $10 million and 4 years to produce, is a waste of money, as it just repeats what they've been complaining about for 30 years.
I feel this is quite outrageous. I think it is inhuman, and I am completely disappointed even by the reaction of the Nigerian government to say we are going to study the report and come out with something when they are saying people are dying by the day. I think what the least the Nigerian government ought to have done the next morning after the report is to revoke the license of Shell.
But there's no chance of the Nigerian government revoking Shell's operating license because of the damage. More than 90% of the government's revenue comes from oil exports, giving oil companies like Shell tremendous political leverage. And local people say that even in light of the report, Shell, as it tries to clean up the mess, is still causing more damage and pollution to the area. Take a look at this man-made pool of crude oil. It's supposed to be part of the cleanup operation, but local people tell us it's having the opposite effect, because when it starts to rain, the pool rises and flows into the rivers and streams where many people get drinking water from. They also say Shell is covering much of the damaged area with sand, so they call it a cover-up, not a cleanup. The Nigerian government and Shell say they're working on a plan to try and reverse the devastating impact of oil production in this region. But many people feel the damage to the environment...
Oh, thanks for having us. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Yeah, and to you pro-American fuckers, thanks for your money. Fucking Malinsky. Anyways, everyone's sucking back cigarettes or drinking corporate beer that they haven't looked at what the ingredients are on. You're fucking contributing a lot to the fucking terror and endurance of animals. And I hope you feel a little guilty about it.